It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon when Camille Ayers stepped into the Vista Grand Mall in Atlanta. The air was cool, perfumed with the scent of new leather and floral cleaning products. A string quartet played softly from the speaker system overhead, creating an atmosphere of refined elegance that had taken her years to perfect. Camille, dressed in a tailored navy blue pantsuit that had cost more than most people earned in a month, walked with effortless grace past window displays of luxury. Brands Hermes, Chanel, Louis Vuitton, their crystalline facades reflecting the afternoon light that streamed through the mall's magnificent skylight. Her phone buzzed once against her hip. She glanced at it briefly in a mail confirmation from a property acquisition. The third one that week, another shopping center in Phoenix. This time a struggling outlet mall that her team would transform into something extraordinary. She slipped the phone into her clutch without a second thought. She wasn't there for business. Not today. This was personal. Camille had grown up not far from this mall, in a neighborhood called Riverside Heights, though there was no river, and precious little height to speak of. It was a place that didn't have sidewalks or safe playgrounds, where broken streetlights stayed broken for months, and the closest grocery store was a 40-minute bus ride away. As a child, she used to press her face against the bus window during the rare trips into the city, staring at this very mall with its gleaming exterior and wondering what it looked like inside. The building had seemed like a fortress then, impenetrable and magnificent, housing treasures she could only imagine. Now, she owned it. She owned all of them 17 Vista malls across the Southeast, with 3 more under construction and depending acquisitions. But that wasn't public knowledge. Not yet. Camille Ayers kept a low profile. No entourage trailing behind her like the wake of a ship. No designer logos screaming her wealth. No photographers capturing her every move. Just results. Quiet, devastating, transformative results. And today, she wanted to walk alone, to see the people who moved through her spaces, to feel the pulse of her empire, without the filter of hierarchy, without the careful choreography of executive visits, where every interaction was rehearsed and every problem temporarily hidden. She had built Vista malls from nothing, starting with a single failing strip mall in Birmingham that she bought with every penny she had, plus a loan that had nearly given her a heart attack to sign. That was 12 years ago. 12 years of 18-hour days, of studying consumer patterns like a sociologist, of transforming dead retail spaces into vibrant community hubs. 12 years of proving that a black woman from Riverside Heights could not only play in the big leagues, but could rewrite the rules entirely. The Vista Grand Mall was her crown jewel. 200 stores across 3 levels, anchored by a Nordstrom and a Macy's, with a food court that featured everything from artisanal ramen to authentic Ethiopian cuisine. The architecture was her vision: soaring ceilings, natural light, gathering spaces that felt more like a European plaza than a sterile American mall. She had commissioned local artists for the installations, insisted on living walls of plants, created quiet corners with comfortable seating where teenagers could study and elderly people could rest. As she walked, Camille noticed everything. The way the cleaning staff moved efficiently but unobtrusively. The strategic placement of security cameras visible enough to deter trouble, discreet enough not to feel oppressive. The mix of customers, families with strollers, teenagers in groups, elderly couples walking for exercise, young professionals grabbing lunch. This was what she had envisioned: a space that served everyone, that didn't exclude or intimidate based on zip code or bank account. She paused at the central fountain, watching a toddler in overalls toss pennies into the water while his grandmother counted to 10 in Spanish. The sound of children's laughter mixed with the ambient music, creating a symphony of human life that no consultant or designer could orchestrate. This was why she did it, not for the profit margins, though those were excellent, but for moments like this, for the democratization of space, for the radical act of creating places where everyone belonged. Her reflection in the fountain's surface showed a woman who had just turned 38, though the stress of building an empire had added subtle lines around her dark eyes. Her hair was pulled back in a low chignon, professional but not severe. She had learned to dress the part: expensive but not flashy, authoritative but not intimidating. It was armor, in its way, protection against those who would dismiss her before she even spoke. Camille turned away from the fountain and walked into Velaro, a high-end boutique known for its exclusivity and its prices that could fund a small country's GDP. The store was all marble and gold accents, with evening gowns displayed like museum pieces and a shoe section that resembled a gallery of sculptural art. She had personally approved Vallaro's lease application, drawn to their commitment to sustainable fashion and their promise to feature emerging designers, alongside established luxury brands. As she perused a rack of silk blouses, each one carrying a price tag that would have fed her family for a week. When she was growing up, she noticed the sales associate watching her, not with the practiced eye of customer service, assessing preferences and budget to maximize commission. This was different. This was suspicion, pure and undisguised. The associate was a woman in her mid-20s, blonde hair in perfect waves, makeup applied with professional precision. Her name tag read Madison. She wore the standard Vallaro uniform black dress, pearl necklace, and an expression that suggested she smelled something unpleasant. Madison didn't approach with the usual, "Can I help you find anything?" She didn't offer to put items in the dressing room or suggest coordinating pieces. She simply watched, arms crossed, as if Camille were a potential shoplifter rather than a potential customer. The surveillance was so obvious that other customers began to notice, glancing between Madison and Camille with uncomfortable awareness. Camille had experienced this before, of course. Despite her success, despite her carefully curated appearance, despite the quiet confidence that came from owning the very ground they stood on, she was still a black woman in a luxury store. To some people, that would always equal suspicion. First, customer second. She selected the pieces, a cream silk blouse with hand-stitched details and a cashmere wrap in deep burgundy, and headed to the register. The items together cost more than many people's monthly rent, but Camille barely glanced at the price tags. She had learned long ago that financial freedom wasn't just about having money. It was about not having to think about money. The cashier, a young man who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, finally met her eyes when she placed the items on the counter. His hands shook slightly as he removed the security tags, whether from nervousness or something else. She couldn't tell. "Will this be cash or card?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Card," Camille replied, her tone neutral and professional. The transaction completed in silence. "No, did you find everything you were looking for?" "No, would you like to join our rewards program?" "No, thank you for shopping with us." Just the mechanical beep of the register, the whisper of tissue paper, and the crinkle of the boutique's signature bag. Camille collected the bag and stepped out into the polished corridors of the mall, the marble floors gleaming under the afternoon light. She had barely taken 3 steps when she heard it. "Ma'am." The voice behind her carried the weight of authority and an edge of suspicion. She turned, unsurprised to see a mall security guard approaching. He was a tall man in his late 40s, white, with graying hair and the bearing of someone who took his job very seriously. His uniform was pressed, his shoes polished, his expression hard. His name tag read C. Delaney in block letters. Chuck Delaney had worked security for 8 years, first at a shopping center in Marietta, then here at Vista Grand for the past 3. He considered himself a professional, someone who could spot trouble before it started. He'd caught shoplifters, broken up fights between teenagers, and handled everything from medical emergencies to bomb threats. In his mind, he kept the peace. He protected the good customers from the bad elements. And something about the woman in the navy suit had set off his internal alarms. "Yes?" Camille asked, turning calmly to face him. "We've received reports of someone fitting your description, loitering near the storefronts," Delaney said, his voice carrying across the corridor. Several shoppers slowed their pace, sensing drama. "I'm going to have to ask you to leave." The words hung in the air like smoke from a fire. Camille felt the familiar tightness in her chest. The same feeling she'd had as a child when teachers assumed she couldn't read, when bank loan officers suggested she might be more comfortable with a smaller loan amount, when potential business partners insisted on meeting her supervisor instead of dealing with her directly. But she had learned control. She had learned the power of stillness. "I just made a purchase," she said, her voice level and clear. "Would you like to see the receipt?" Delaney barely glanced at the Vallaro bag in her hand, as if expensive shopping bags were easily counterfeited or stolen. "You need to leave. Don't make this harder than it has to be." By now, a small crowd had gathered. Some shoppers stopped outright, phones already emerging from pockets and purses. Others slowed their walking, pretending to examine store windows, while their ears strained to catch every word. The central corridor of the mall, usually filled with the comfortable hum of commerce and conversation, had taken on the electric tension of a confrontation. Camille remained composed. She had learned this skill in boardrooms and negotiation tables. In moments when showing anger, even justified anger, would be used against her. She pulled out her wallet slowly, deliberately, and retrieved the receipt. Her movements were calm, measured, designed to diffuse rather than escalate. "Here," she said, extending the slip of paper toward him. Delaney took it, looked at it for perhaps half a second, long enough to satisfy the minimal requirements of due diligence, but not long enough to actually process any information, then handed it back. The paper crinkled between his fingers, evidence dismissed without consideration. "Still need you to exit the premises," he said, his voice growing firmer, more authoritative. Now, she was silent. No visible anger, though inside, familiar emotions churned: frustration, disappointment, a deep weariness at the predictability of it all. She had hoped that success might insulate her from this, that owning the building might somehow change the equation. Or racism, she had learned, was remarkably adaptable. It evolved with circumstances, but never truly disappeared. The silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken implications. The crowd grew larger, a semicircle of spectators, watching a drama they didn't fully understand but instinctively recognized. Some had their phones out, recording. Others whispered to companions, speculating about what was happening and why. Then, from the direction of the Apple store, someone shouted, "Wait, is that Camille Ayers?" A young woman emerged from the crowd, her Apple store uniform immediately identifying her as an employee. She was in her early 20s, black, with natural hair styled in a crown of curls and eyes wide with recognition. Her name tag read Keisha, and she held her phone in one hand, the screen glowing with what appeared to be a Google search result. Delaney scoffed, his confidence unshaken. "Who?" Keisha turned her phone toward him, her hand trembling slightly, with excitement and disbelief. There, on the screen, was Camille's face on the cover of Forbes magazine from 6 months ago. The headline read, "Camille Ayers, the mind behind Vista Malls." The reaction was immediate and dramatic. Gasps rippled through the crowd like a wave. One by one, phones lit up as people frantically Googled the name. The whispers became a murmur, then a buzz of shocked recognition. "She owns the mall, every Vista property in the country. Oh my God, she's like super rich. Isn't she the one who donated all that money to schools?" Delaney's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, recognition, and finally, dawning horror. The color drained from his cheeks as the implications hit him. He had just ordered the owner of the entire mall to leave her own property. He had just publicly humiliated one of the most powerful women in retail real estate. He stepped back, his authority evaporating like morning mist. I didn't," he began, but the words died in his throat. Within 5 minutes, the scene had transformed completely. Two regional managers appeared as if summoned by magic, their faces flushed with panic and exertion. Behind them came a public relations representative, a woman in her 30s with the hairy look of someone whose phone had been ringing nonstop. The apologies were frantic, overlapping, desperate. "Ms. Ayers, I'm so sorry. There's been a terrible misunderstanding. We had no idea you were here. If we had known, this doesn't represent our values or our training." Someone, a mall manager she didn't recognize, tried to hand her flowers, hastily grabbed from a nearby kiosk, the cellophane crinkling loudly in the sudden silence. She declined politely, her voice steady and calm. Then she turned to Delaney, who stood frozen in the center of the expanding chaos, his face a mask of professional catastrophe. The crowd held its collective breath, waiting to see how one of the most powerful women in the city would handle the man who had just tried to eject her from her own building. "Security is about discernment," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the corridor, "about protecting people with dignity. Today, you failed at both." The words were delivered without heat, without raised voice, without dramatic gestures. They were simply stated, factual, devastating in their calm precision. Around them, the mall seemed to hold its breath. Then she walked away. But that wasn't the end. Behind closed doors, in the executive offices on the 3rd floor of an adjacent office building, Camille made calls. Quiet calls, professional calls, the kind of calls that reshape organizations from the inside out. The next morning, a memo went out to every mall employee in the entire Vista chain. The subject line was simple: mandatory training initiative. The content was more comprehensive. Effective immediately, all Vista Properties employees would participate in enhanced training on cultural competency, unconscious bias recognition, and customer engagement protocols. This training was mandatory for all staff levels, from part-time associates to senior management. Completion was required within 30 days. Chuck Delaney's name wasn't on the employee system anymore. The termination had been swift, but not vindictive. There was a severance package generous enough to avoid legal complications, but not so generous as to suggest approval of his actions. His security clearance was revoked, his access cards deactivated, his uniform collected. The official reason given was restructuring of security operations, which was technically true. A week later, Camille received a call from Dr. Patricia Williams, the dean of the business school at Emory University. Dr. Williams was organizing a forum on leadership, identity, and corporate responsibility. Would Ms. Ayers consider speaking? Camille almost said no. She had turned down dozens of similar requests over the years: conferences, panels, award ceremonies. She preferred to work behind the scenes, to let her properties and her employees be the public face of her company. But something about Dr. Williams' description of the forum intrigued her. She shared the story not out of spite, but as a case study on what it meant to own space, to have power, and to use it responsibly. She talked about her childhood in Riverside Heights, about building her company from nothing, about the responsibility she felt to create spaces that welcomed everyone. Power, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the auditorium, is not just about what you can build or buy or control. It's about what you choose to do with those resources. It's about whether you use your position to recreate the systems that excluded you, or whether you use it to tear those systems down. She ended her talk with one sentence that would later go viral. Sometimes, you don't have to raise your voice to change the room. You just have to own the building. When TEDx Atlanta reached out the following week, she said no without hesitation. She didn't need applause. She needed structure. She needed systems that worked without her constant intervention. Within a month, Camille had hired Equity Solutions, a private consulting firm specializing in organizational bias and inclusive practices. The contract was comprehensive: audit security practices across all Vista properties, interview employees at every level, review complaint data, and assess the customer experience from multiple demographic perspectives. But she didn't stop there. She launched her own investigation, unofficial and unannounced. She did what she had always done when she needed to understand something completely. She went into the field herself. She flew to Detroit first. No limo, no assistant. She checked into a Hampton Inn under her own name and walked to the Vista Motor City Mall. What she found disturbed her. Near the fountain in the central court, she watched a young black father being harassed by security guards for letting his toddler play in the water feature, a feature she had specifically designed for children's interactive play. "Sir," the first guard said, "children aren't allowed in the fountain." The father looked up, confused. "The sign says it's a children's play area, not for playing in the water, only for looking." Camille approached the group. "Excuse me, is there a problem here?" When the guards claimed they worked for Vista Properties Security, she revealed her identity. "Then you work for me. I'm Camille Ayers. I own this mall." The effect was immediate. She apologized to the father and walked away, leaving behind two security guards who knew their jobs were in serious jeopardy. Houston was next. At Vista Bayou Center, she witnessed systematic harassment of a transgender teenager by 3 security guards. They followed the teen and her friends throughout the mall, creating an atmosphere of intimidation and surveillance that made other customers uncomfortable. When one guard demanded identification from the teenagers for no apparent reason, Camille intervened. She showed him her photo on the Vista Properties website and handed her business card directly to the harassed teen. "You're welcome here anytime," she told the girl. "If anyone harasses you again, call me directly." In Oakland, she encountered a deaf woman struggling to communicate with store employees who were ignoring her attempts to ask for help. Camille stepped in, using the sign language she had learned years ago, and personally assisted the woman with her shopping needs. Each incident became data. Each observation became evidence of systemic problems that required systemic solutions. She wrote a 200-page report and delivered it without announcement to the Vista Executive Board. It was called Silent Floors, Silent Fears. The board was stunned by the depth of the problems she had uncovered and the comprehensive solution she proposed. From this report came the Equity Division, a new branch of operations focused on human dignity, community access, and restorative outcomes. She established the Mirror Protocol, a data-driven, human-validated approach to auditing behavior, engagement, and impact across all properties. She launched the Ayers Scholarship for marginalized youth pursuing careers in retail ethics, urban design, and social architecture. The scholarship didn't just provide financial support, it included mentorship, internships, and direct pathways into leadership positions within Vista Properties. Then she returned to the mall where it all began. She stood in the same corridor where Chuck Delaney had tried to eject her. She saw the same kiosk, the same shop windows, but the staff was different. The training was different. The culture was different. The manager of Velaro was now Dr. Amara Johnson, a black woman with a PhD in cultural engagement and 15 years of experience in luxury retail. The security team had been completely restructured with new hiring, practices that prioritized community policing background and bias training. Every employee, from part-time sales associates to senior management, had completed comprehensive cultural competency training. The changes were visible in countless small ways. The art installations now featured work by local artists from diverse backgrounds. The seating areas were designed to accommodate different cultural preferences for social interaction. The food court included vendors representing the demographics of the surrounding community. The children's play areas were truly inclusive, with equipment suitable for children with various disabilities and sensory needs. But the most significant change was invisible. It was in the air, in the atmosphere, in the way people moved through the space. There was a sense of belonging that hadn't existed before, a feeling that everyone was welcome, that everyone was valued. A year later, she published a book, not a memoir filled with personal anecdotes and inspirational quotes, but a manual, a practical guide titled The Quiet Owner: Systems for Inclusive Leadership. The book outlined specific strategies, provided templates for bias audits, included case studies from the Vista transformation, and offered tools that other business leaders could implement immediately. It became required reading in business schools across the country, not because it was inspiring, but because it worked. The Vista Properties model was being studied and replicated by companies worldwide, and Chuck Delaney, his termination had become a case study in every training video, not as an example of punishment, but as an illustration of what happens when systems fail to support good judgment and inclusive practices. The training materials were careful to humanize him, to show how bias could affect anyone, and to demonstrate that the goal wasn't to shame individuals, but to create systems that prevented such incidents from occurring. Camille never raised her voice, but the entire retail industry had shifted, not by accident, but by intention. She had not come to power through anger or confrontation, but through clarity and systematic change. Now, every time someone walked into a Vista mall, they felt it, in the way they were greeted by staff who had been trained to see every customer as valuable, in the art on the walls that reflected the diversity of the community, in the presence of justice made visible through policy and practice, in the accessibility features that ensured everyone could navigate the space with dignity. She didn't need to be known. She didn't need recognition or awards or magazine covers. She needed to be effective. She needed to create change that would outlast her involvement, systems that would continue to promote inclusion long after she was gone. Legacy, she believed, wasn't carved in marble or written in headlines. It was woven into the fabric of systems, embedded in the daily operations of organizations, reflected in the thousands of small interactions that shape people's experiences of public space. And she was still weaving, quietly, systematically. Always, the Vista Grand Mall continued to thrive, not just as a commercial space, but as a model for what retail could become. When it prioritized human dignity alongside profit, other mall operators sent teams to study their practices. Urban planners incorporated Vista's accessibility standards into municipal codes. Business schools added Vista's training protocols to their curricula on organizational change. But for Camille, the real measure of success wasn't in the accolades or the imitation. It was in the small moments she observed during her regular, unannounced visits to her properties. A security guard helping an elderly customer find a store instead of watching her with suspicion. A sales associate taking extra time to assist. A customer whose English was limited instead of dismissing her. Children of all backgrounds playing together in water features designed for their joy. These moments weren't scripted or performed for her benefit. They happened because the system she had created made them inevitable. That was the power of quiet ownership, changing not just policies and procedures, but the very culture of an organization. The assumptions people made, the default behaviors they exhibited. The mall industry had noticed. Within 2 years of the Vista transformation, inclusive training had become standard practice across major retail chains. Security protocols were rewritten. Customer service standards were elevated. The changes rippled outward, influencing how people thought about public space, about who belonged where, about the responsibilities that came with creating places where communities gathered. And Camille Ayers, the girl who had once pressed her face against bus windows dreaming of spaces she couldn't access, had not just gained entry to those spaces, she had transformed them entirely. She had used her power not to join an exclusive club, but to make the club itself more inclusive. She had proven that sometimes the most radical act is not to storm the castle, but to buy it quietly and then tear down its walls from the inside. That change doesn't always announce itself with fanfare, but sometimes whispers its way into existence through policy memos and training manuals, and the daily choices of people who have been given better tools to make better decisions. The quiet owner had spoken, and the whole world had heard.